A very, very kind friend of mine ended up sending me a copy of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet
Oh,
in pre-order code. So I do actually have hands-on experience with it, and the reports of everyone saying that the game visually looks bad, I can corroborate this because there are some moments where just visually the game chugs and it looks like it goes almost down to like 20 FPS. It's pretty awful looking.
I was looking at videos from like people on Twitter and everything, and for a minute there, I was like, "Are you guys putting filters on this? Because this doesn't like this looks really bad." Like I was like, "This doesn't look great." And to be fair, also Sword and Shield did not look really hot either. It looked fine. But what Nintendo games usually do is they have really good art direction to mask the fact that they're on inferior hardware. And Violet and Scarlet was didn't seem like it was even doing that. Like, what is it? The game looks ugly, or does it not look designed very well? What's the issue? Do you think?
Me personally, I think it's just that the game just looks ugly, and that's mostly down to just Game Freak just not being great at visual optimization for their games on Switch. Because conversely, earlier this year, you had Xenoblade Chronicles 3 come out, and that's probably by far one of the best looking Switch games that you can buy right now. And there's no suboptimal frame rates in that game. Everything transitions smoothly. It just looks really bad on Game Freak because it almost kind of makes them look like a completely inept studio who, after several years of the Switch being out, still doesn't know how to maneuver around the Switch console itself.
Xenoblade looks like I was surprised at how good Xenoblade looked. Definitely, the talk that was going around, not only on Twitter but on TikTok, which I'm not on, and I only saw this video from TikTok from another YouTuber and did a YouTube video on it, basically saying the reason why this is so bad is because the hardware is so bad. Do you
Yeah,
agree with that?
and I see the hardware thing being thrown around a lot, and honestly, I don't think it's a hardware issue, especially when you have games like Xenoblade Chronicles that run completely fine on the Switch hardware. I think it's literally down to just the fact that Game Freak's staff is either A, inept, or B, overworked, that they just cannot get the optimization properly done on their games. Maybe that excuse or that hypothesis might have been something plausible to mention back on Sword and Shield when people may not have gotten the full story, but it just seems like Sword and Shield was another bad optimization job. And then we have Scarlet and Violet, which has now sort of shown that the game still looks poorly optimized. And then just when you have recent games on Switch that clearly don't have too much visual performance issues that look perfectly fine or run at a very stabilized frame rate. Recent releases being stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, the Near Automata port that recently came out. That one runs at a very stable frame rate. Just you've got a whole bunch of these games that have recently come out with very, very stable frame rates, and all of them that have stable frame rates seem to have just the fact that the developers or port houses that were working on them did a very, very good job to make sure to leverage and optimize their game to use the Switch hardware in a way that doesn't bog down the system. And Scarlet and Violet go, I think the main Pokemon loop is fun. The whole bit about being free to explore whichever gym you want. There's a bit of issue on that gameplay loop, which I can elaborate a little later on, but yeah, just I think visually, I think it's just mostly down to the fact that just Game Freak has just not gotten used to how to optimize their game to run in a great state on the Switch, and that just really is more due to the fact that just when you have other big high profile games that have recently released that have stabilized frame rates, it just ends up exacerbating how bad Scarlet and Violet look.
I mean, we talked about it last week as to why we think Nintendo and the Pokemon Company decided that it was okay to release this in this condition, or why it was in this condition in the first place as well. and I think we had an impasse basically as to what the reasons were. You're saying it's Game Freak and their inability to work in 3D. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, because even during the transition to 3D with the 3DS games,
Mm-hmm.
it was clear that just, in my opinion, that Game Freak just was not used to working in 3D or really just doing much in 3D. I think X and Y was a prime example of that because the movement really wasn't fully 3D movement. It was just kind of movement along certain pathways, and then when you got out to the field, the movement was still grid based and everything.
That could be that you could be right on that. And do you also think also the other thing is that maybe they're not staffing up as well? I mean, if we're looking at a big game like that with 3D, and you're doing it in maybe a different engine, you'd probably want to staff up big time in order to actually get that running the best way possible. I think I read somewhere, didn't Ubisoft in one of their Assassin's Creed games had like 500 people working on their game, and Game Freak is much less than that. I forgot what the number is, but it's a lot less than that. And if you're doing a fully 3D game with a company that has not been used to doing fully 3D games, and they're doing it for the first time, pains to say that you should have more staff in order to help with the transition. The other thing also with this as well is with Pokemon Company and Game Freak is their need to stay with the traditions of the Pokemon game itself. I don't see a lot of people talking about this, but could it also just be at this point that people are starting to get tired of the formula? I know the reason why that the Pokemon Company and Game Freak do it the way they do it is because they always think of this could be somebody's first Pokemon game. Okay, fine, but it's not selling $10 million. It's not selling 10 million units to all new people. The vast majority of them are people who've played the game. Do you think it's time for that? Do you think it's just a fear of evolving the entire product?
That could possibly be a concern. To the point about the number of employees Game Freak has, as of 2022, they are reporting that they have 169 employees total.
Wow,
So,
that's
yeah,
it?
yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, when you were talking about how Ubisoft had like almost 500 employees, yeah, that's quite a stark difference in just the amount of staff just working on stuff. So, and that's 169 employees divided over 2 locations in Japan. They are kind of working on a skeleton crew now that you mention it with the staff numbers.
That is a low amount. Like
Oh
maybe
yeah, totally.
maybe Nintendo runs their studios low for a reason, but you're also talking about a series that for some reason I guess needs to keep a certain cadence. Like I was thinking about it a couple nights ago, and there seems to be a Pokemon, is not a mainline Pokemon game, but there seems to be a Pokemon game coming every year. Whether it's Arceus, or it's the Let's Go games, or it's just something Pokemon has to come out every year, it just seems like. And it could be in their best interest at this point to not do that, I guess. Is to just stop and just say, okay, we may need to like freshen up this entire series, because it as much as I do. Well, I didn't like Sword and Shield. I loved Sun and Moon. I thought Sun and Moon was great. But even then, it was more like a nostalgic, man, I really loved Red and Blue. Like, Red and Blue is one of my favorites. But I played Sun and Moon, and I was like, wow, this really reminds me of Red and Blue a lot. But in a great, and it does a lot of things as well that improved upon it. I just, for some reason, I'm looking at Pokemon and saying, does it really need to be something that has a new game every 3 years? Is that really necessary? Couldn't they just add on and add on and add on with the mainline games? Like, I mean, you'd have to make a fantastic game, but look at Destiny 2. Okay, and as much as I refuse to play Destiny 2 now because of what I did, Destiny 2 is built on a fantastic framework and has great gameplay, where they can update that game for now. How long it's been? Like 5 years now. It's been released. Destiny 2.
I think so.
Yeah, Pokemon does not have to be technically impressive. It can look. It has to look good, but it doesn't need to be technically impressive. You could have a Pokemon game come out and then update that for years upon years upon years with new Pokemon, new areas, and everything, and do it like that, and people will be just as fine with it. I don't understand, unless this is Nintendo not willing to do that. I mean, that would be, I think, the best evolution for Pokemon at that point.
I think really one of the main issues that I have with Pokemon, even as somebody who pretty much has been kind of a long time Pokemon fan and everything, just I hate that new mechanics will get introduced, and then suddenly, once the next game comes out, whatever mechanic was in the previous game just gets completely tossed in the garbage. Mega evolutions, that was a thing for X and Y, and then that got dumped, and then eventually we get to Sword and Shield, where the Gigantamax mechanic, kind of a neat mechanic, and then that gets pitched into the garbage, and then now you've currently got a terrestrialization mechanic, which I actually think the terrestrialization mechanic is very fresh, mostly because of the fact that just with the terrestrialization mechanic, you can end up getting Pokemon that have a Terra type that could be completely different than what they may be weak to. So, for example, you could get a water type Pokemon that normally would be vulnerable to electricity, but it could have a Terra type turns it into an electric type. So basically, just you get into a battle and just the opponent is using nothing but electric Pokemon and everything. You can just use the terrestrialization mechanic and just boost up your Pokemon to take on its Terra type, and then boom, it becomes an electric type, and then you get to see the nice message of this move is not very effective on this Pokemon.
Yeah. So, do you think the gameplay mechanics and everything are solid?
I mean, they're solid enough that beginning gamers can understand, but I think really where it gets kind of nitty gritty and potentially advanced is if you're really into the PvP mechanics. When you get really into the PvP mechanics of just wanting to battle people online for days on end, then that's where you can get into really complex matchups. You can set up Pokemon that have like ideal traits, perfect EVs and IVs. Just there's so much that you can do if you really, really want to get into the nitty gritty of just doing the PvP stuff. There's a bunch of videos of people just, getting into some really intense matchups and everything of just setting up Pokemon that have like the most ideal personality traits, like a personality trait that might make them a little bit more resilient to taking fatal damage and stuff like that. So it's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down into, especially if you really want to get into the whole PvP thing. That's kind of fun for people who enjoy the PvP aspect. That's personally, I'm not into the PvP thing. I like the whole collecting aspect, just collecting the Pokemon throughout the journey, doing what needs to be done to get them to evolve into their higher stage forms and everything. And then, of course, the Terra raids are basically a iteration on the Sword and Shield Gigantamax raids and everything. I think those have been pretty fun, especially from the fact that if a Pokemon appears in the Terra raids, unlike what happened with the Gmax raids in Sword and Shield, you had a potential chance to catch a Pokemon. It could be the one that you're looking for. It could be like a shiny legendary Pokemon that you've been just slaving over to find. And in Sword and Shield, you actually could have a chance of that Pokemon just breaking out of the Monster Ball, and then you'd be like, "Well, sorry, try again, get into another raid, and pray that you get this Pokemon to land on and everything." Whereas in Scarlet and Violet, the host has a 100% guaranteed chance to catch the Pokemon in a raid. The participants in that lobby have a pretty much damn near close to 100% chance.
Okay.
So there is still a chance if you're kind of like a participant in a lobby, but generally it's so low that you would have a Pokemon just break out of the Monster Ball and everything. So it's damn near close to 100%. So if you're one of those who obsesses about having your Pokemon in just the most perfect Pokeball, you don't have to worry about the ball breaking while you're trying to catch a Pokemon. So like if you want to catch a Eevee that has a ghost Terra type, and you want it to be in a Premier Ball, then yeah, you could pretty much technically catch one in a Premier Ball without generally having to worry about it breaking out of the ball and then losing that Eevee because you decide to go with a more swag-looking Pokeball to put it into.
I really wish Game Freak and the Pokemon Company would look at the community that they have when it comes to competitive Pokemon and just put some implementations down for where other people can get into that stuff. Because I got into Sun and Moon big time. And I got into it pretty late, but I really enjoyed Sun and Moon and everything it was doing. Though I kept thinking, it might not be a bad idea for the next Pokemon to get into this stuff because this is kind of fun, and I wouldn't mind trying that out. That seems pretty cool. And then of course, Sword and Shield happened. I didn't like it very much. I was like, well, that's not happening. But the thing I wish they would do is they would introduce that aspect more, or have something in there where people can actually get into that stuff through the game without going to like all these websites or to all these trackers and calculators or anything on the PC that you would have to go into. I just wish they would put more of that into the game itself. Overall, like if the game does get better, if they work on it a lot more, and they get into a state where it doesn't feel broken, could you recommend it? Would you play it more?
I personally think so. I mean, just like I said, for me, just the gameplay loop is fun enough. I mean, it's not like the deepest thing in gaming. This is not me saying that Pokemon's the greatest game ever or anything like that. But I mean, just I do agree that it would be nice for them to kind of be a little bit more transparent about just how some of the advanced mechanics work, especially for anyone who really wants to dive deep into either doing PvP battles or even doing something like perfect breeding of Pokemon just to get a Pokemon that has just absolutely perfect stats, or just even for those who really want to go out of their way to just get the bling factor as high as possible. Maybe even just making it a little bit easier to figure out the shiny mechanics and stuff like that, because I know some people are super obsessed with just catching shinies and also breeding shinies, but yeah, that's a whole mess of its own and everything.
Yeah.
The good part about some of the mechanical end stuff is some of the stuff that they have done in Scarlet and Violet. One of the big things that has made me actually quite ecstatic about some of the mechanical changes is the ability to remember and forget moves. In all of the previous games, usually you would have to go to a person who specializes in helping Pokemon either forget or remember moves in their entire history. In Scarlet and Violet, you actually do that in the Pokemon summary menu. So
nice.
There's no need to travel to find the NPC who can help you remember and erase moves. So that's one change that I think is just absolutely awesome, especially because, I mean, I can't count how many times in the past games where I'll go, okay, I think this is the moveset I want to go with, and then it turns out, oh my god, I shouldn't have deleted that move. That move is pretty much one of the best moves for this one Pokemon. Shit. Okay, well, I guess I gotta go recatch one, retrain it, and then, just make sure that when it gets to level such and such, not to delete this move out.
Yeah.
So that's a change I think that's in the positive for the series, and I love it.
Good.
Renaming is also the same thing. You just go into the Pokemon summary menu, and there's an option to rename the Pokemon. So if you named your Pokemon something terrible, and then you realize, oh yeah, I actually hate that name, then yeah, you can actually go and rename the Pokemon right there. So no need to search for an NPC to rename your Pokemon either. And then I think the one that you were kind of surprised with when I was just streaming it in our Discord server and everything was the ability to create TMs via craft.
Yeah, that was a when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's not a bad idea. That's actually a pretty good idea. Because
Yeah.
I remember like when you get TMs in all the other games, I would never use them ever because I'm like, I gotta find the right Pokemon, and I never find the right Pokemon that I feel like it's for, or to have to look up a guide or something to see, okay, what's the right one to put it on, which also is a bummer because if you have to do that, then it really isn't your Pokemon, So
Yeah. And what makes it interesting is going back to the point of just you can manage to forget and remember moves on all of your Pokemon. If you use a TM on a Pokemon, and then at some point you decide, oh, that was a terrible idea. That move is really bad on this Pokemon. You forget the move, and then let's say later you're just like, oh shit, I shouldn't have deleted that TM move. The move function on Scarlet and Violet also remembers TM moves
nice.
on top of the level moves as well too. So just another nice thing that just makes it just so much nicer, especially for anyone who might not be on the up and up on the PvP end, but just maybe they're trying to develop a move set to beat a gym leader or something. At least you can now go back to your Pokemon's entire move history and go, actually, let me shift my moves around. Let's have this one, keep this one, and yeah, let's go ahead and keep the fourth move too. So just it's such a great quality of life feature, and I really hope that they don't delete these 3 quality of life features out going forward on the next Pokemon games,
Yeah.
because just this has actually made playing Violet just a lot of fun.
Yep.
Because just I'm not having to search for NPCs, and to the point of TMs, I'm not having to go, okay, well, I'm short on money because I'm not fighting a bunch of trainers or anything, and okay, I've done everything, so I have to play the end game tournament just ad nauseum until I farm up enough money to go and buy whichever TMs I need. The fact that you can just craft them as long as you have the right Pokemon mats and everything, I just think it's a great change for the better.
I guess what you're saying is until if they improve the game, technically, would you recommend people getting this?
If you're not a graphical eye candy nerd, then the game's probably fine. Do be aware that there have been some really odd crashes that have happened to some people in my, I want to say, 20 or 30 hours with the game. I have not really encountered any crashing, though one problem I have had encounters with pretty often is when I'm trying to queue up for a random Terra raid. Sometimes I'll have a Nintendo Switch system message saying, hi, we tried to connect you to the Terra raid, and unfortunately the connection was interrupted, so you're going to be sent back to the Terra raid menu to requeue up. So that's about as annoying of a bug that I've run into, but my experience will not reflect everyone's experience.
Okay. So, would you recommend it?
Only if you don't really care too much about the visual stuff that's going on with it. If visuals are important to you, then yeah, just I would say probably avoid it and maybe wait until Nintendo or Game Freak or both announce that there's going to be a new patch that fixes up everything. But yeah, I mean, if visual fidelity is important to you, then yeah, just definitely avoid it. Wait for a sale. Wait for a patch. But if you're kind of a person who's just like, I just want kind of a fun and engaging enough game, then yeah, Pokemon just seems perfectly fine. It's not good, but it's not bad either. It's just kind of real dead in the middle.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this podcast segment. The Capital Games podcast is done every week, and we post it on all your favorite podcast apps, as well as segments on YouTube. If you want to listen to another segment, you can listen to a new one right there on the screen. We also do a movie podcast called the Capital Games Movie Club. If you'd like, you can go ahead and click on that and see all the movies that we have reviewed from that point. Thank you for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon.